Whispers in the Pines. A camping trip in the vast wilderness turns into a father's worst nightmare when his young daughter vanishes without a trace. Two local boys hold the key to the mystery, but their silence speaks volumes. The air in the cabin was thick with the scent of pine and stale coffee. Detective Cannon ran a hand through his thinning hair, the knot in his stomach tightening with each passing hour. Another missing child. This time a little girl named Lily, barely 7 years old, with eyes the color of the summer sky and a laugh that could chase away any shadow. Her father, Thomas, a man whose grief was a palpable presence in the room, sat across from him, staring blankly at a faded photograph of Lily, a tiny gap-toothed smile beaming back. "She just vanished, Detective." Thomas's voice was hoarse, raw from shouting Lily's name into the indifferent forest. One minute she was there, playing by the stream, the next, nothing. The stream was a ribbon of silver, winding through the ancient, whispering pines of the Shawnee National Forest. This was Thomas's annual ritual with Lily, a week of escaping the city's clamor, of teaching her about constellations and the subtle language of the wild. Lily, an urban sprite, adored these trips, transforming into a miniature explorer, her imagination turning every fallen log into a dragon and every rustling leaf into a secret message. Their campsite, nestled beside the gurgling stream, had been idyllic. A small bright tent, a crackling fire pit, and the symphony of crickets at dusk. On that fateful afternoon, Thomas had been gathering firewood, just a few hundred yards upstream, while Lily played with her favorite doll, Willow, a ragtag creation with yarn hair and button eyes. He'd called out to her every few minutes, hearing her cheerful responses. Then, a silence, a chilling, absolute silence that had slammed into him like a physical blow. He dropped the axe, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs, and sprinted back. Willow lay discarded near a cluster of ferns, but Lily was gone. No footprints, no torn clothing, no sign of a struggle, just the vast, indifferent forest. The search had been immediate and exhaustive. Rangers, volunteers, K-9 units, they'd scoured every inch of the rugged terrain. Days bled into nights, hope slowly eroding like a river stone. The media, a hungry beast, descended, turning Lily's innocent face into a national headline. Yet, the forest held its secrets close. Detective Cannon, a veteran of countless cases, felt the familiar prickle of unease. There was something about this one. No ransom note, no known predators in the area, and Thomas, though devastated, had an alibi as solid as the granite mountains surrounding them. "Were there any other people around, Mr. McCoy?" Cannon asked, his voice gentle. Thomas shook his head. "We prefer secluded spots. That's why we come here. We saw a few hikers on the main trail the day before, but that's it. Nobody near our site." "Are you absolutely certain?" "Absolutely." But Cannon had a hunch, a nagging feeling that Thomas's certainty might be misplaced. The forest, after all, belonged to more than just the animals. There were cabins scattered throughout, homes of hardy folk who preferred the quiet solitude to the bustling towns. And sometimes, children from those homes roamed freely, their own wild spirits echoing the landscape. He'd heard whispers from the local sheriff about two boys, troublemakers, known for their mischievous streaks and their uncanny ability to disappear into the woods for hours. Josh and Dylan, about 10 and 12 years old respectively, lived with their grandmother in a dilapidated cabin about 5 miles deeper into the forest. They were often seen near the trails, sometimes setting snares for small game, sometimes just watching. Cannon decided it was time for a visit. He drove his patrol car down a barely there dirt track, the tires crunching on loose gravel, the dense canopy of trees creating a perpetual twilight. The air grew cooler, damper, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The cabin, when it finally appeared, was a testament to neglect: peeling paint, a leaning porch, and a tangle of overgrown weeds. An elderly woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, answered the door, her eyes wary. "Can I help you, officer?" "Mrs. Gable?" "I'm Detective Cannon. I'm investigating the disappearance of Lily McCoy. I understand your grandsons, Josh and Dylan, spend a lot of time in these woods. I was hoping to speak with them. Mrs. Gable's lips thinned. Boys are out. Don't know where they are. Always roaming. When they get back, could you tell them I'd like to talk? It's important. She merely grunted, her gaze sweeping over the forest as if she expected the boys to materialize from the shadows. Cannon left his card, a sense of foreboding settling over him. He returned to the campsite later that day, the fading light casting long, eerie shadows. The area was cordoned off, but he wanted to walk the perimeter again, to see if anything had been missed. As he moved through the undergrowth, he noticed something. A small, crude stick figure, its head adorned with a feather, jabbed into the soft earth near the stream. It wasn't Thomas's, and it certainly wasn't Lily's. It looked like something a child, perhaps a slightly older child, might make. He took a photograph of it, a new piece added to the perplexing puzzle. The next day, Cannon got a call from Mrs. Gable. The boys were home. He drove back to the cabin, the sun, now high above, struggling to penetrate the thick canopy. Josh, the younger one, was wiry, with a shock of unruly brown hair and eyes that darted nervously. Dylan, the elder, was stockier, his face a mask of sullen indifference, his gaze often fixed on some distant point beyond the detective. Boys, I'm Detective Cannon. I'm looking for a little girl named Lily McCoy. She went missing a few days ago, not far from here. Did either of you see anything unusual around the stream area, say, 3 days ago? Cannon kept his voice calm, non-threatening. Josh's eyes flickered, then dropped to his worn boots. Dylan remained impassive, picking at a loose thread on his faded jeans. We ain't seen nothing, Dylan finally mumbled, his voice flat. You're sure? You spend a lot of time in these woods. You might have seen something small, something you didn't think was important at the time. Josh shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting to Dylan, who gave him a barely perceptible shake of his head. Nope, Dylan repeated, more firmly this time. Didn't see nobody. Cannon knew they were lying. He could feel it in the tension that crackled between them, in Josh's downcast eyes and Dylan's forced nonchalance. But he couldn't push too hard. Children, especially in these isolated areas, could be fiercely protective of their own secrets, their own unspoken rules of the wild. He tried a different tack. I found something at the campsite. A stick figure, with a feather. Did either of you make that? Josh's head snapped up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, quickly masked by Dylan's steely glare. Ain't ours, Dylan said, too quickly. Cannon nodded slowly. Okay. Well, if you remember anything at all, no matter how small, you call me. This little girl, Lily, she needs to get home. He handed them each a card. Your grandmother has my number too. As he walked back to his car, he glanced over his shoulder. Josh was watching him, a haunted look in his young eyes. Dylan, however, had already turned away, disappearing into the shadows of the cabin. Days turned into a week. The search continued, albeit with less intensity. The hope in Thomas McCoy's eyes had been replaced by a deep, aching despair. Lily's face, once vibrant, now seemed to stare out from the missing posters with a poignant sadness. Cannon couldn't shake the feeling about the boys. He went back to their cabin several times, but they were always out or asleep. Mrs. Gable was becoming increasingly evasive. It was clear she was protecting them, or perhaps protecting herself from whatever truth they might reveal. One afternoon, Cannon was reviewing the aerial photographs of the search area. He zoomed in on the terrain around the McCoy campsite. The forest was a dense, impenetrable green, but he noticed a faint, almost imperceptible line. A deer trail, perhaps, or an old logging path, winding away from the main stream and deeper into a particularly secluded part of the woods. It wasn't on any of the standard maps. He decided to investigate it himself. Armed with a compass and his trusty intuition, he set out. The path was barely discernible, overgrown with thorny bushes and fallen branches. It was the kind of path only someone intimately familiar with the woods would know. The kind of path two boys, who spent their lives roaming, would know. After an hour of pushing through thick undergrowth, the trail opened into a small, sun-dappled clearing. In the center stood an ancient, gnarled oak tree, its branches reaching out like skeletal arms. And beneath it, partially hidden by a thicket of ferns, was a small, makeshift fort. It was constructed from fallen logs and branches, skillfully interwoven to create a surprisingly sturdy structure. A narrow opening served as a door. Cannon's heart began to pound. This wasn't just a fort, it was a hideout. A secret place. He approached cautiously, his hand on his holstered weapon. He peered inside the dark opening. The air was cool and still. There were rough blankets, some tattered comic books, and an assortment of woodland treasures, smooth stones, dried berries, a bird's nest. And then, his eyes landed on it. A small, brightly colored hair ribbon, adorned with a tiny plastic butterfly. It was Lily's. He'd seen it in one of the photographs. A cold dread washed over him. He stepped fully into the fort, his gaze sweeping the interior. He saw something else then, tucked under a small pile of leaves, a worn rag doll with yarn hair and button eyes. Willow, Lily's doll. Cannon felt a surge of conflicting emotions, relief that he had found something, anything, and a chilling fear of what it all meant. Lily had been here, that much was certain. But where was she now? And what role did Josh and Dylan play in this? He radioed for backup, his voice tight with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. While he waited, he examined the fort more closely. He noticed small hand-drawn pictures tacked to the inside of the walls with thorns. Crude drawings of stick figures, some with large smiling faces, others with angry frowning ones. And in one corner, a drawing that sent a fresh wave of ice through his veins. A stick figure girl, with long flowing hair, being pulled by two larger stick figures towards a dark, shadowy cave. When the other officers arrived, a full-scale search of the clearing and the surrounding area began. They found more small details, a discarded juice box, a half-eaten granola bar, items that confirmed recent occupation. But still no Lily. Cannon knew he had to get the truth from Josh and Dylan. This time, he wouldn't take no for an answer. He went back to the cabin with two other officers. Mrs. Gable, her face grim, finally admitted the boys were in their room. They found them huddled on their beds, their faces pale, their eyes wide with fear. The bravado had completely evaporated. "Boys?" Cannon said, his voice firm but not unkind. "We found your fort, and we found some of Lily's things there. We know she was with you. We need you to tell us what happened." Josh started to tremble, tears welling in his eyes. Dylan remained stoic for a moment, then, with a defeated sigh, he finally spoke. "We didn't mean no harm, Detective." His voice was barely a whisper. We just wanted to play." And then, slowly, haltingly, the story began to unfold. They had been watching Lily from a distance for a few days. They'd seen her playing by the stream, always alone, always so happy. They were lonely boys, isolated in the woods, and the sight of another child, particularly one so vibrant, had ignited a strange curiosity in them. They'd been fascinated by her doll, her bright clothes, her carefree laughter. On the day she disappeared, they had approached her. Lily, initially startled, had soon been charmed by their offers to show her a secret fairy kingdom, their fort. They'd played for hours, sharing their meager snacks, showing her the hidden nooks and crannies of their woodland sanctuary. Lily, always a child of vivid imagination, had been enthralled. They hadn't meant to keep her, not at first, but as the afternoon wore on and the sun began to dip below the tree line, a strange idea had taken root in Dylan's mind. They didn't have anyone to play with. Lily was fun. What if she just stayed for a little while longer? When Lily, suddenly remembering her father, had wanted to go back, Dylan had convinced her to stay just a little bit longer, promising a grand adventure at dawn. Josh, younger and more easily swayed, had gone along with it. They were used to being alone, used to making their own rules in the wild. The idea of borrowing a playmate didn't seem so wrong to them. But then, the search parties had started. The sirens, the shouting, the helicopters. Panic had set in. They knew they were in trouble. They'd heard their grandmother talking about the missing girl. They'd tried to take Lily back, but she had become scared, confused by the sudden change in their demeanor. She started crying, calling for her father. In their panic, not knowing what else to do, they had done something truly terrible. They had taken her further into the woods, deeper than anyone would ever think to look, to a place only they knew. An old, abandoned mine shaft, partially collapsed, a place they called the Sleeping Dragon's Lair. They had left her there, promising to come back for her when the bad men, the searchers, had gone. They'd given her a blanket, a bottle of water, and a granola bar, telling her it was a secret game, a test of bravery. Lily, terrified but trusting, had gone inside. They had been too scared to go back, too afraid of the consequences. Every day, they'd watched the searchers, their guilt a heavy stone in their young hearts. They'd seen Thomas McCoy, his face etched with agony, and their shame had grown unbearable. They'd hoped she would just disappear, that the forest would swallow her up, and their secret would remain buried. The officers, their faces grim, exchanged horrified glances. Time was of the essence, a young girl, trapped in an old mine shaft for over a week. Cannon barked orders. A rescue team was immediately dispatched. The boys, now sobbing uncontrollably, led them to the mine shaft. It was exactly as they had described, a dark, gaping maw in the earth, barely visible beneath a tangle of thick vines and fallen leaves. The rescue was a delicate, agonizing process. The shaft was unstable, a death trap, but the team, fueled by a desperate hope, worked tirelessly. Hours later, a cheer erupted from the mouth of the mine. Lily. She was weak, disoriented, covered in dirt, but she was alive. Her eyes, once bright, were now shadowed with fear, but a flicker of recognition crossed her face when she saw the worried faces above. She was immediately rushed to a waiting ambulance. Thomas McCoy, when he heard the news, collapsed in tears of overwhelming relief. He raced to the hospital, his heart bursting with a joy he hadn't thought he'd ever feel again. Back at the mine shaft, Cannon looked at Josh and Dylan. They stood beside their grandmother, their small shoulders slumped, their faces streaked with tears and dirt. They were just children, lost in their own world of the forest, their innocent games spiraling into a horrifying ordeal. Their intentions, perhaps, hadn't been malicious, but the consequences of their fear and their silence had nearly been catastrophic. The legal system would decide their fate, but Cannon knew that the boys, too, were victims of a different kind, victims of isolation, of ignorance, and of a terrible, terrible mistake. As the sun began to set, casting long purple shadows across the forest, Cannon walked away from the mine shaft. The image of Lily's small, trembling form burned into his mind. The whispers in the pines had finally given up their secret, a chilling tale of innocence, fear, and the dark, unpredictable depths of the human heart, even the youngest ones. And then, as the last rays of sunlight faded, another discovery was made back at the fort. Tucked deep within a hollow log, a small, worn, leather-bound journal. It wasn't Lily's, nor was it the boys'. It was old, its pages brittle with age. Inside, in faded ink, were crude drawings, similar to the ones on the fort walls, depicting stick figures. But these told a different story. They showed a small girl being led away, not by two boys, but by a solitary, shadowy figure. And beneath the drawings, scrawled in a shaky hand, were dates. Dates that predated the McCoy family's arrival by weeks. And then, a name, almost illegible, but definitely there. Anna. Suddenly the stick figure drawing in the fort, the one of the girl being pulled into a cave, took on a new, sinister meaning. It wasn't a warning, it was a recreation. A recreation of something they had seen, not done. The mine shaft. The Sleeping Dragon's Lair. It wasn't just a place they had taken Lily, it was a place where something terrible had happened before. Cannon's blood ran cold. The journal, the drawings, they weren't about Lily, they were about Anna. And the boys, Josh and Dylan, they hadn't put Lily in the mine shaft. They had found her there, barely alive, and in their own twisted, desperate way, believing the bad men were coming for them, they had tried to protect her, to hide her from a darkness they themselves had witnessed. The real monster, the actual shadow that haunted the Shawnee National Forest, was still out there, lurking, watching, and waiting. And now, thanks to two frightened boys and their desperate secret, Detective Cannon finally had a lead. The Whispers in the Pines weren't just a story about two boys and a missing girl. They were the echoes of a much older, much darker secret, waiting to be unearthed. The whispers in the pines had not gone silent. They had only grown colder, taking on a new, more sinister tone. Detective Cannon stood staring at the brittle, century-old journal. The page was a testament to a long-forgotten terror, a name scratched into its surface like a grave marker. Anna. The two boys, Josh and Dylan, had led him to an ancient evil disguised as an abandoned mine shaft. They hadn't put Lily there, they had found her. The chilling implication. The woods weren't just a place where children got lost. They were a place where they were taken. And Anna, well, Anna was the beginning of the story. Cannon's investigation took a sharp turn, shifting from a simple missing person case to a full-blown cold case. A quick search of local archives revealed a missing persons report from 30 years ago. A young girl named Anna Mae McCoy, same last name as Lily's father. Cannon's stomach twisted. He dug deeper, finding faded newspaper clippings. Local girl vanishes in woods. The headlines screamed. No leads in Anna McCoy disappearance. The case had been ruled a runaway after a few weeks, despite her parents' protests. The woods, they reasoned, had simply claimed her. Cannon found Anna's parents still living in the same small, weather-beaten house on the edge of town. Her father, a man named George, his eyes distant, simply sat and stared out the window at the relentless rain. Anna. She loved those woods. Eleanor's voice was a fragile whisper. She spent every waking moment out there. She had her secret places. Did she ever talk about a mine shaft? A place she called the Sleeping Dragon's Lair? Cannon asked, his voice gentle. Eleanor's head snapped up, a spark of something other than sadness in her eyes. Oh yes. She and her friend, another boy from the woods, they found it. They said it was their fortress. A friend? Do you remember his name? He was just a quiet boy, kept to himself, lived with his grandmother, came from a distant part of the family. Sam, I think his name was. Sam McCoy. The last name hit Cannon like a physical blow. He scribbled it in his notepad, a new name and a new chapter of this dark story. He left them with a sense of guarded hope, promising to find out what happened to their daughter, a promise they had waited 3 decades to hear. Cannon knew his next stop was the place where the nightmares began. He visited the boys, Josh and Dylan, who were now living in a state-run facility, their fear replaced with a grim resignation. He brought the journal with him. This is Anna, Cannon said, pointing to a crude drawing of a girl. Did you see her? Josh's eyes widened. The ghost girl. Ghost? Yeah, Dylan said, his voice flat. We'd see her sometimes, just a flicker in the shadows, like she was watching us. The ghost isn't real, is she? Cannon pressed. No, Dylan said, his face paling. The man who took her, he's real. He lives out there. He has a cabin deep in the pines. Cannon's heart pounded against his ribs. The boys, in their own terrified, fragmented way, had been trying to communicate all along. The drawings weren't a confession, they were a witness statement. They hadn't put Lily in the shaft they'd found her where the man had left her, hoping she would become the ghost, just like Anna had become a phantom of their childhood. The boys gave Cannon a rough description of the man, a reclusive figure, almost a part of the forest himself. They had always been taught to avoid him, to stay quiet and out of sight whenever he was near. The man had a collection, they said, of things he took from the girls. Mementos. The journal was likely one of them. The hunt began. Cannon and a team of seasoned rangers went back to the Shawnee Forest, this time with a clear purpose. They followed the boys' directions, pushing deeper into the uncharted territory, past the known trails and old logging roads, guided only by the children's traumatized memories. They found it on the other side of a steep ravine, a dilapidated cabin, so overgrown with moss and vines it looked like a part of the landscape. The air around it was thick with a strange, unnatural silence. The only sound was the wind, a long, mournful sigh through the trees. The cabin's interior was a grim museum of lost childhoods. On the walls, framed like morbid artwork, were braided pigtails, ribbons, and tiny mud-stained shoes. A collection of dolls, their eyes hollow and empty, sat on a shelf. A journal, identical to the one Josh and Dylan had found, sat open on a small wooden table. This one was filled with meticulous, chilling details of each girl. Dates, names, the cruel, silent death they met in the dragon's lair. The man wasn't there. He had known they were coming. The back door hung ajar, a silent invitation to a deadly game of hide-and-seek. The forest, a silent witness to his crimes, was his domain. The chase was a nightmare. The man, Sam McCoy, moved through the woods with the silent grace of a predator. He was a master of the terrain, a ghost in the trees. He led them on a brutal, winding path, setting traps, using the forest's ancient, tangled roots and rocky outcrops to his advantage. Cannon, a city man, was out of his element, but his determination to end the reign of terror drove him forward. They cornered him at last, at the edge of a cliff overlooking a churning river. Sam, his face a mask of deranged fury, held a small, rusted knife. He was a thin, gaunt man, his eyes a cold, soulless blue, but his grip on the knife was surprisingly firm. He snarled, his voice a low hiss, a sound more animal than human. "They just wanted to play," he said, his voice raw. "Just like I wanted to play. I showed them my lair. The dragon, it eats them. They're all there, sleeping." The fight was quick and brutal. Sam, in a last act of desperation, lunged at Cannon. He tripped on a loose rock, his momentum carrying him over the cliff's edge. His final scream was swallowed by the roar of the river below. The nightmare was over. The forest, however, held its silence. It was a silence filled with the ghosts of children. The discovery of Sam's journals led to the recovery of other bodies, long buried in the forest floor. Anna, and many more. The Shawnee National Forest, once a place of natural beauty, was now a grave. Cannon stood at the edge of the cliff, staring down at the turbulent water. The case was closed. The monster was gone. But the echoes of the children, trapped in the cold, unforgiving pines, would remain. He thought of Lily, a survivor, a testament to a terrible game that almost ended in tragedy. And he thought of Anna, a lost girl whose memory, rescued from a tattered journal, had finally brought a measure of justice to a place that had long forgotten its victims. The whispers in the pines had been her voice, a silent plea that had finally been heard.